Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to our February Hungry for History lecture. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Luciana Spraker, the Archives and History Officer for the City of Savannah. We have a really exciting program today, A Witness to History, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. Our speaker is Bob Ciecevich. Bob is a local historian, author, and preservationist. He's a native of Savannah, and he spent his summers growing up in the Collins Cottage on Tybee Island's Back River. A member of the Tybee Island Historical Society and the Friends of Cockspur Island Lighthouse, he is active in recording and studying Tybee's unique heritage. His published books include Tybee Island, The Long Branch of the South, and most recently, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse, A Witness to History. Bob has 2 degrees from the University of Georgia, a BA in Political Science, and a Master's of Historic Preservation from the School of Environment and Design. He started Quatrefoil Historic Preservation Consulting in Savannah in 1994 and has over 30 years of experience in the field, serving communities in Savannah and throughout Georgia. On Tybee, Bob has conducted multiple historic resources surveys of the island and has written National Register nominations for the Tybee Inlet, Back River, and the Tybee Strand Cottages Historic Districts, as well as multiple individual National Register nominations. He's currently working on a National District nomination for the Central Tybee Island neighborhood. So everyone, I want to welcome Bob Ciecevich today.
Since the founding of the colony of Georgia, Cockspur Island has played an important and continuous role in our nation's military and maritime history. Its strategic location just inside the mouth of the Savannah River makes the island ideal for defensive and navigational purposes, for which it still serves today. Since the early 18th century, Cockspur Island has been the site of multiple fortifications spanning practically all periods of our nation's history, such as Fort King George during the colonial period, which would have featured a blockhouse similar to Fort Edwards in Nova Scotia, and Fort Greene during the early Republic period, Fort Pulaski during the antebellum and Reconstruction periods, Battery Hambright during the Spanish-American War, and Navy Section Base number 20 during World War II. It has been the site of a lazaretto and quarantine station, as well as numerous navigational beacons. Today, Cockspur Island still serves as the location of the Savannah Bar Pilot's Dock and the U.S. Coast Guard Station. During much of this time, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse has stood as a witness to the history that has unfolded here through the centuries. Since the beginning of the colony of Georgia, the east end of Cockspur Island has served as an important navigational point for the port of Savannah as it separates the north and south channels of the Savannah River. The first Tybee Island Lighthouse was built in 1736 to mark the entrances to the Savannah River, but mariners still had to sail 17 miles upstream and circumvent several islands to reach the port of Savannah. While no beacon is known to have been constructed on the island during the 18th century, a pilot house was built on Cockspur Island for the pilot of the river in 1768, and Fort Greene, located on the island's southern tip, denoted by the red arrow, was reported to have been staffed by a small garrison during the 1770s to issue signals to ships entering the river. In 1827, a day-marked beacon was constructed on Grass Island off the tip of Cockspur Island, or Cockspur Point. The need for such a beacon was certainly associated with the federal government's plans for Fort Pulaski. The southeast end of Cockspur Island was selected as the site for the new fort in 1821, and construction on the North Channel Pier, dike system, and construction village was begun in 1829. In 1837, Congress approved $3,000 for the construction of 2 unlit brick beacons on Cockspur Island, of which one appears to have been intended as a replacement for the earlier wooden daymark built in 1827. The Cockspur Island beacon, the first brick tower built on the islet off the eastern tip of Cockspur, was intended to mark the entrance to the South Channel. The other brick tower was the Oyster Beds beacon, which was intended to mark the entrance to the North Channel. It was constructed on Oyster Bed Island, a small oyster shoal in the Savannah River. The Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds beacons were the first of a series of small daymarks, beacons, and range lights that were built during the mid to late 19th century to improve navigation along the Savannah River corridor. The Pulaski Beacon, which was also referred to as Fort Beacon, was a third brick day mark built on Cockspur Island near the North Pier as part of the construction village begun in 1829. A day mark is a navigational aid that is unlit or lacks a lighting apparatus at its apex, such as the Pulaski Beacon, shown here, and the Cockspur and Oyster Beds beacons when they were first constructed. Although referred to as a beacon, these towers were not true lighthouses in the practical sense, as they did not possess a lighting apparatus, but nevertheless made up an important part of the navigational system of local waterways. In 1848, the superintendent of the lights in the Savannah area recommended that the Cockspur beacon should be converted into a lighthouse. The proposed plans were sent to the auditor of the Treasury Department and included an estimate by noted local architect John S. Norris to, quote, repair, alter, and put up lights and lanterns on the round tower or beacon on Cockspur, according to the plan elevation and specifications accompanying this, for $2,350, end quote. Norris prepared these before and after plans you see here of Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds beacon towers as they appeared in 1848, while still unlit brick day marks as depicted at the far left, and after the conversion to lighthouses after work was completed in 1849 as depicted at the far right. Oops, sorry, that was the slide. So the beacons, when they were day marks, they're on the far left, and then this is what they look like on the far right after they're turned into lighthouses. Okay. Under Norris's direction, work on the rebuilding and retrofitting of the Cockspur Island beacon was complete by February 1849. According to annual reports of the Lighthouse Board, the lighthouse had a fixed white light which emitted from 5 lamps with 14-inch reflectors, possessed a focal plane that was 25 feet above sea level, and generated a light that was visible for 9 3/4 miles at sea. Oyster's Bed beacon possessed the same characteristic as its counterpart, although it displayed a fixed red light and was square in shape, perhaps as a way of differentiating the two beacons when they were originally built as day marks. In 1850, a third lighthouse was added to the Savannah River navigational system. The Fig Island Lighthouse was a small wooden harbor light mounted on the top of a keeper's dwelling, which was located on the north side of the river about a half mile east of the city wharves. In 1858, a harbor light, the Bay Beacon Light, was installed at the east end of Bay Street as a part of the Fig Island Light Station and as an additional aid to navigation. These lighthouses were the beginning of a system of over a dozen beacons that would eventually light the way for ships traversing the Savannah River from Tidy Light to the Port of Savannah. After the beacons were converted into lighthouses, the Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds beacon lighthouses became part of a true light station, as a keeper would be necessary for the first time to maintain the beacons and to keep them lit and maintained. As part of the work in establishing the light station, a keeper's house was built near the Cockspur Island Lighthouse to accommodate the lighthouse keeper and his family. During the first years, the light station was assigned only one light keeper, who was responsible for both lighthouses, making multiple trips daily to the beacons to service the lights. While the islet in which the Cockspur Lighthouse was located could be reached by foot at low tide, the Oyster Beds beacon was located on a small island in the North Channel and could only be reached by boat, which made it highly dangerous to reach at high tide. In February of 1853, the boat lighthouse keeper Cornelius Maher was rowing to the Oyster Beds beacon capsized, and he drowned. His wife, Mary Maher, took over as lighthouse keeper in her husband's place, becoming one of the few female keepers employed by the Lighthouse Board along the Savannah River. And this is a view of the Cockspur Lighthouse from Fort Pulaski taken in 1862. It gives you some perspective of the distance the lighthouse keepers had to row and tend the lights. And here's another perspective, a view of the North Channel of the Savannah River taken from the North Pier, Fort Pulaski, with Oyster Bed Island visible in the distance. In 1854, the original Cockspur Lighthouse was destroyed by a gale. Captain Jeremy F. Gilmer, the new superintending engineer of lighthouses on the Savannah River, sent estimates to the Lighthouse Board requesting funds for the reconstruction of the tower as well as improvements to the keeper's cottage, which survived the storm. At Gilmer's request, the ironwork for the new beacon, the lantern housing, lantern level floor, vents, lantern door, and door frame was manufactured in Baltimore. The bricks used in the construction of the lighthouse, Savannah gray bricks, are the same type that were manufactured locally by enslaved labor at Hermitage Plantation in Savannah, the same brick used in the construction of Fort Pulaski. Upon its completion in 1856, a 6th order Fresnel lens was installed in place of the oil lamp, which the earlier tower was equipped. The Cockspur Island Lighthouse, designed by engineers of the 6th District Corps of Engineers. This design represents an early departure from the old early federal period lighthouses. In 1852, the authority to oversee the construction, repair, and maintenance of lighthouses in the United States was moved from the Lighthouse Establishment to the Lighthouse Board, which delegated the supervision and construction of aids to navigation to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. By 1857, the Lighthouse Board adopted a standardized plan for lighthouse construction. Designed by Captain Jeremy F. Gilmer in November of 1855, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse is representative of the evolution in lighthouse design that was occurring at the time, and is emblematic of the early transition from the old antebellum period lighthouses, like the original Cockspur Island, Sapelo Island, and Little Cumberland Island lighthouses seen here, to the modern standardized lighthouses designed by district engineers during the Lighthouse Board era. On the right is the standardized plan for the first order lighthouses designed by the Corps of Engineers and adopted in 1857, and to the left, the Tybee Island Lighthouse, which was reconstructed in 1867 utilizing the new plan. As it was designed during a period of change within the Lighthouse Board, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse is fairly ornate compared to earlier lighthouses, featuring decorative corbelled brickwork at the apex of the tower, portholes in the north and south elevations, and round arched door and window openings. The design of this simple yet elegant little lighthouse exudes a sophistication not found in most of the lighthouses which came before it, perhaps as a result of being designed by the highly trained engineers of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Because it was designed as a channel light, the lighthouse retains the somewhat short, squat stature of its predecessor. It is 46 feet tall, has a base that is 16 feet in diameter, and features 3 levels, the first being 8 feet above sea level, as the tidal islet it is situated on is underwater at high tide. A spiral brick staircase leads to the first landing, which is constructed of wood. A wooden ladder provides access to an iron hatch in the lantern room floor. The lantern room is encircled by an exterior catwalk with an iron guardrail, which is accessed by a small iron door. Round arch wood windows provide natural light at each landing. The iron lantern at the top of the tower features 10 trapezoidal glass panes. A unique aspect of the tower's design can be seen in its base, which was designed as a bow facing the river to calm incoming waves. A historic American Building Survey report completed in 1980 suggests that the bow utilized in the Cockspur Lighthouse was a precursor to a later design feature utilized in wave-swept offshore towers. After the new lighthouse was completed, the Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds Beacon Light Station was assigned a head lighthouse keeper, and a first assistant lighthouse keeper for the first time, likely as a result of new regulations enacted by the Lighthouse Board when the Corps of Engineers assumed supervision and management of the nation's lighthouses after 1852. During the Civil War, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse was literally caught in the middle of one of the most significant battles to take place in Georgia during the war, the siege and reduction of Fort Pulaski. After Union troops took control of Tybee Island in 1861, the lights of the Savannah River lighthouses were extinguished. On April 10, 1862, Union batteries on Tybee Island began the bombardment of the fort, which continued throughout the day. Despite being in the direct line of fire, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse remained unscathed. As reported in the Savannah News Press, the lighthouse was unharmed because the angle required to send the shells the proper distance propelled them over the top of the beacon rather than through it. National news correspondents present at the scene provided illustrations which depict the lighthouse in the midst of battle, as well as in its aftermath. The southwest view appears to be from the perspective of one of the Union ships moored in Tybee Roads. And this illustration depicts the Cockspur Lighthouse in Fort Pulaski from the perspective of the Union batteries on Tybee Island after its surrender. Arrangements to relight the beacons was begun shortly after the end of the war. After making minor repairs and painting the beacon white to serve as its day mark, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse was relit on April 25, 1866. In 1868, Patrick Egan began his second stint as head keeper of the Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds Beacon Light Station, with a succession of his sons serving as the first assistant. By 1870, Thomas Egan had replaced his older brother John as assistant lighthouse keeper. In August of 1871, the two keepers, along with Michael Egan, one of his juvenile sons, took the boat out during a heavy storm to service the Oyster Beds Beacon. The boat capsized and Patrick and his younger son managed to hang on to the overturned boat while Thomas was lost to the treacherous waters. His body was never located. Throughout the 1870s, district supervisors made recommendations to replace the old keeper's dwelling located at Cockspur Point. Its location depicted here by the red arrow on the photo in the upper right corner of the slide, which is also the location of the light station wharf. The arrows and hatched lines show the treacherous itinerary taken by the light keepers. The annual report of the Lighthouse Board alludes to this tragic event years later in its assessment of the dangerous conditions of the light station. Quote, "The Oyster Beds Beacon is attended by the same keepers who attend the Cockspur Beacon. During heavy northeast winds, they run great risks in crossing the river to reach the light, and one keeper is known to have lost his life, and another is supposed to have shared the same fate in trying to reach the light. A dwelling on iron poles adjacent to the light is recommended by both district officers." End quote. The construction of a second keeper's dwelling adjacent to Oyster Beds Beacon would have made the job of the keepers much easier and safer. Yet this recommendation was never heeded. Instead, by the 1880s, each lighthouse was given its own wharf. The wharf and boathouse for Oyster Beds Beacon was constructed adjacent to Fort Pulaski's North Pier, which made it much safer to cross the North Channel of the Savannah River. Taken in 1885, this image may be the earliest photograph of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. It appears to be a photo documenting the work completed in building the plank walk and boat landing reported in the annual report of the Lighthouse Board for that year. The elevated plank walk and boat landing was vitally necessary for keepers of the Cockspur Lighthouse, as the light would need to be attended despite rough seas and high tides. Throughout the late 19th century, the Lighthouse Board made several efforts to improve navigation along the Savannah River, constructing additional beacons and day markers, as well as minor lighthouses. In 1867, the first of a series of range lights were introduced when a framed skeletal tower equipped with a fourth-order Fresnel lens was built east of the Tybee Lighthouse, providing a range for mariners entering the Savannah River. Range lights are a pair of lights that are aligned to enable seamen to maintain the center of a channel. In 1877, the earlier light was replaced by the more permanent iron beacon pictured at the right. By the end of the 1880s, several additional ranges had been established along the length of the river channel. The Tybee Knoll Cut Range Light Station, situated on the easterly end of Long Island, was the second in a series of range lights established for general river navigation on the Savannah River. The range was located west of Cockspur Island and was intended to mark the dredged cut through Tybee Knoll. Each beacon was equipped with a 6-order Fresnel lens and was lighted on November 1st, 1879. Seen in the historic photo at the left is the Tybee Knoll Range rear lighthouse, which consists of a beacon mounted on top of a keeper's cottage with a light emanating from the gable. The range front beacon was a frame construction, as depicted in the drawing on the right. Both featured East Lake style ornamentation, a design characteristic that was standard for lighthouse keepers' dwellings built by the Lighthouse Board during the 1870s and 1880s. George Martis, the older brother of Florence, Savannah's waving girl, was head keeper of the Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds Beacon Light Station when a devastating hurricane struck Tybee Island on August 27, 1881. Martis and assistant lighthouse keeper James Keeley took refuge in the casements of Fort Pulaski, where it was reported that the water rose to 5 feet over the parade ground. During the storm, the water rose halfway up the Cockspur Lighthouse, and all of Cockspur Island was submerged, resulting in the destruction of the old keeper's cottage, as well as the largely abandoned Fort Village. The recently completed Tybee Knoll Cut Range Light Station on Long Island was also severely damaged by the hurricane, which destroyed the front tower. Instead of building a new keeper's cottage for the Cockspur Island and Oyster Beds Beacon Light Station, the head keeper, assistant keeper, and their families were housed in temporary quarters within Fort Pulaski. In 1881, an appropriation of $60,000 was made to light the Savannah River between its mouth and the city of Savannah. As indicated in the annual reports of the Lighthouse Board, quote, "It is proposed to erect 12 iron lighthouses, 2 on Defusky near Bloody Point, 3 on Jones Island, 2 on Elba Island, and 2 near Fort Jackson. The metal work for these structures is completed and ready for the erection at the sites," end quote. Referred to in the annual reports of the Lighthouse Board as the Savannah River Lights, these 12 lighthouses made up 6 light stations, each consisting of 2 range lights, complete with a keeper's dwelling, wharfs, and boathouses. These new light stations completed the ranges begun at Tybee Island in 1867, and more recently on Long Island with the Tybee Knoll Cut Range lights. As depicted here in this inset map of the 6th District that appeared in the 1881 annual report of the Lighthouse Board, and as described in the 1884 report, quote, "On the completion of this system of lights, vessels can come in at night by ranges to a point inside Oyster Beds Beacon, and leading lights will guide them from there to Fort Jackson, where 2 more ranges show them the way to the very wharves of the city of Savannah," end quote. This illustration of a range light erected on Paris Island, South Carolina by officials of the 6th District was included in the annual report of the Lighthouse Board for 1881. This prefabricated iron beacon was the first of its kind and was the same type erected along the Savannah River during the early 1880s. These river lights were inexpensive, easy to build, and could be disassembled and reused elsewhere if a light station was discontinued. This drawing of the iron beacon at Venus Point was completed in 1881 and is identical to the beacon at Paris Island and the other beacons erected on the Savannah River. As indicated in the annual report of the Lighthouse Board for 1881, the locations for the lights were already selected and plans approved, indicating that the 6th District officials had adopted and planned to implement this new type of lighthouse system-wide as a standard for river navigation. As stated in the book, The Modern Lighthouse Service, published in 1889, altogether, quote, "Altogether, it is the most economical structure of its kind in the history of lighthouse construction. The light, which runs up and down in rails in the plane of the structure, is housed by day, and at night is hoisted to its place at the apex of the triangle by machinery worked in the oil house," end quote. The contemporary photo at the right is of the restored oil house at the Paris Island rear beacon, which was a standard for this beacon type. As reported in the annual report of the Lighthouse Board, all the iron beacons that made up the new system of river lights were in place and first exhibited on May 26, 1884. In addition to the beacons, the report states, quote, "They were built for the convenient service of the lights, 5,000 linear feet of plank walk, 2 boathouses, and 10 boat landings, 2 of them on palmetto piles." In 1885, district officials were close to completing the light stations for the Savannah River Lights, reporting the construction of 5 substantial boat landings with plank walks connecting them with their respective beacons. In addition to this work, district officials also directed their attention to the maintenance and upkeep of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. As reported in the annual report, quote, "The landing at the tower was strengthened, a boat landing was built on metal piles, 200 linear feet of plank walk were laid and various minor repairs were made, end quote. The construction of the keeper's dwelling for the Elba Island Range Light Station in 1887 marked the completion of the Lighthouse Board's Savannah River Lights project. James Feely, who served as assistant lighthouse keeper for the Cockspur, Oyster Beds, Beacon lighthouses under George Martis from 1881 to 1884, was the head keeper at Elba Island and may have been the first to occupy the new dwelling. In 1887, George Martis became the second head keeper at Elba Island, living here with his sister Florence until his retirement in 1931. The Elba Island's keeper's dwelling, which cost $3,500 to build, was an example of the Lighthouse Service's standardized plan for keeper's quarters that was implemented at light stations in the Southeast during the 1870s and 1880s. Iterations of this standard keeper's dwelling type were built at all the Savannah River area light stations during the 1880s, including Bloody Point Front Range on Fusky Island, Tybee Island Range Rear, and Tybee Knoll Cut Range, as well as throughout the 6th District during the late 19th century. The tremendous outlay of resources, not just for the Savannah River Lights project, but also for the entire 6th District, which spanned the South Atlantic coast from Cape Fear, North Carolina, to Cape Canaveral, Florida, perhaps explains the reluctance of the Lighthouse Board officials to authorize a new keeper's dwelling at the Cockspur Island Oyster Beds Beacon Light Station, when Fort Pulaski remained an economical alternative. When the Elba Island Keeper's Cottage was completed in 1887, there were over a half dozen light stations along the Savannah River alone, each having a keeper's cottage. Being a first-order light station, Tybee Island required 3 keeper's cottages, one for the head keeper, first assistant keeper, second assistant keeper, and their respective families. Considering the importance of Savannah as the world's largest exporter of cotton and naval stores during this time, maintaining this system of navigation was paramount to the 6th District. According to the annual reports of the Lighthouse Board, 6th District officials were constantly repairing the raised plank walks and boat landings on the Savannah River Lights during the 1880s and 1890s. The walks, wharfs, and boathouses associated with the light stations were frequently damaged by erosion, high tides, and storms. In addition, devastating hurricanes in 1893, 96, and 98 wreaked havoc on the Savannah River light stations. On the night of August 27, 1893, a powerful hurricane made landfall on Tybee Island, packing winds of 120 miles per hour and a storm surge of 16 feet. The Sea Island hurricane of 1893 ranks as the 7th most deadly hurricane in United States history. Keepers of the Cockspur and Oyster Beds Beacon lighthouses, Jeremiah Keene and his assistant, Charles Sisson, took refuge in the northwest stair tower of Fort Pulaski, where the men huddled for 10 hours as the storm pounded Tybee and Cockspur Islands. Light stations throughout the 6th District were damaged by the massive and powerful storm, as indicated in the preamble of the district's report published in the annual report of the Lighthouse Board for 1893. Quote, "It is necessary to state, before reporting in detail upon the work of the year, that this district, since the date of the last report, was visited by 2 storms of great severity. The first storm, in August 1893, was preceded by cyclones off the coast, and the high seas engendered by them culminated on August 27th and 28th, and the tide in the 6th Lighthouse District higher by 2 feet than any which has ever been recorded. The center of the storm crossed the coastline between Savannah and Charleston, leaving desolation in its course and causing, it is estimated, a loss of more than 2,000 lives in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. On the Savannah River, 5 barks were wrecked within a quarter mile of Tybee Knoll Cut front light. The Tybee Beacon was undermined and overturned. The structures on the Tybee Knoll Cut front beacon, Elba Island front beacon, Bloody Point front beacon, Defusky Island front beacon and wharf, Hilton Head front beacon, suffered seriously, small structures being carried some distances from their foundations and larger ones injured by wind and tide. Boat landings and elevated wooden plank walks, of which there are some miles in this district, suffered especially. and almost all of them required such extensive repairs as to make it economical to rebuild them. This was the case with the long wharves at Tybee Knoll Cut and Defusky Island light stations." End quote. The oyster bed's beacon sustained considerable and required extensive repair. Additional work conducted at the light station included the extension and repair of the boat landing for the Cockspur Lighthouse, as well as improvements to the quote-unquote temporary quarters for the light keepers. According to the annual report of the Lighthouse Board for 1893, quote, 6 casements in Fort Pulaski were fitted up with partitions, doors, windows, and blind, embrasure shutters, and closets for the accommodation of the 2 keepers, end quote. As noted in the annual report, the lighthouse tender Pharos was engaged in repair and construction duty throughout the summer and fall of that year, making urgent repairs along the Savannah River at the Tybee Knoll Cut, Venus Point, and Cockspur Oyster Beds Beacon light stations. Originally built as the schooner H.H. Talman, Pharos was purchased by the lighthouse establishment in 1854 to serve as a lighthouse tender. In 1890, she was transferred to the 6th Lighthouse District. Pharos was the last sailing lighthouse tender in the service when she was retired in 1907. In 1895, the light station was renamed the Cockspur and Oyster Beds Range Light Station, when the Oyster Beds Beacon became part of a range, with the old beacon serving as the rear range light and the new beacon located 2,000 feet seaward serving as the front range light. Extensive damage to several of the Savannah River light stations during the hurricane of 1896 and 98 ensured that the keepers of the light station would remain in temporary quarters at Fort Pulaski through the rest of the 1890s. During the 1900s, it appeared that the Lighthouse Board would finally erect a proper keeper's dwelling for the Cockspur and Oyster Beds Range Light Station, after some prompting by the 6th District officials. In 1902, the Treasury Department, on behalf of the Lighthouse Board, petitioned Congress for an appropriation to construct a new keeper's dwelling. The contents of the letter are as follows. Quote, "This department has the honor to state, at the insistence of the Lighthouse Board, that since the destruction by cyclone in 1881 of the dwelling then occupied by the keepers of the Cockspur and Oyster Beds Range, Georgia, light station, they have been quartered in the casements of Fort Pulaski, Georgia, which were temporarily fitted for that purpose. These casements are damp, unsanitary, and unsuited to residential purposes. It is impracticable to make them suitable for permanent habitation. The War Department has authorized the erection of a keeper's dwelling on the parapet of Fort Pulaski, Georgia. The Department concurs with the Board as to this urgent need and recommends that an appropriation of $4,000 be made thereof." And again, there's the accommodations that they were. Rather than allocate funds for a new dwelling, the War Department eventually authorized the use of the former Ordnance Sergeant's quarters in 1906, which is located on the top of the parapet of Fort Pulaski, which was enlarged for the use of both keepers in 1907. As indicated in the annual report of 1905, several range lights along the Savannah River were to be discontinued and new ranges established as a result of a dredging project to create new shipping channels. The Venus Point, Jones Island, and Elba Island ranges were to be discontinued once all the new ranges were completed. The Oyster Bed Range rear lighthouse would also be discontinued. As indicated by later annual reports, the Oyster Beds Beacon Lighthouse was not discontinued at this time, nor were Elba and Jones Islands range light stations. However, by this time, the deep draft ships navigating the Savannah River had begun using the North Channel exclusively. In 1909, district officials recommended that the Cockspur Island Lighthouse be discontinued on June 1 of that year, and that the beacon be maintained as a daymark. In the annual report for 1909, Cockspur Island's 6th order was among several other obsolete lights listed under the heading "Lights Discontinued." The Oyster Beds Range lights, however, remained operational until 1912, and the official name of the light station was changed to Oyster Beds Range Light Station, Georgia, and Jones Island Range Lights, South Carolina, effectively August 17, 1909. Following its deactivation, the Cockspur Island Lighthouse was maintained as a day mark by the Lighthouse Service and its successor, the U.S. Coast Guard, until its abandonment in 1949. Interest in the lighthouse becoming a part of the Fort Pulaski National Monument originated with Ralston B. Lattimore, historical technician for the Office of National Parks, Buildings, and Reservations in Savannah. When he wrote to the director of the National Park Service in 1937 recommending that the light be acquired, quote, because of its picturesque value and to protect the monument from the possibility of a fishing camp being established there, end quote. Correspondence between the director of the National Park Service and the commissioner of the lighthouses later that same year indicated a willingness to transfer the titles to Cockspur Point and Oyster Bed Island on the condition that the beacons be maintained, quote, as valuable landmarks and guides to mariners entering the Savannah River. The events of World War II postponed any further discussion of the island until 1949, when a private party expressed interest in purchasing the islet on which the Cockspur Island Lighthouse was situated for use as a weekend spot. This inquiry set in motion a concerted effort by National Monument and National Park Service officials to secure and protect the lighthouse and islet in the belief that the sale of this item to private parties for exploitation or for salvage operations would be most embarrassing to the monument and would completely ruin the historic aspect of the park. Writing in 1955, Ralston B. Lattimore provided the following description of significance to justify the transfer of the islet and beacon to the Fort Pulaski National Monument. Cockspur Light, quote, constructed in 1856 of brick and stone, was an established landmark on Cockspur Point between the fort and the federal batteries at the time of the battle in 1862. It is therefore contemporary with the fort and is an interesting architectural survival. In 1958, the 1-acre Cockspur Island Lighthouse Reservation and the small oyster shell reef known as Daymark Island were transferred by presidential proclamation from the U.S. Coast Guard to the Fort Pulaski National Monument. 1960, Cockspur's sister beacon and the 1-acre Oyster Bed Lighthouse Reservation became part of the Tybee National Wildlife Refuge when it was transferred from the U.S. Coast Guard to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Oyster Bed Island, which originated as a 1-acre oyster shoal, is located at the eastern tip of the Tybee National Wildlife Preserve. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has used the shoal as a dredge spoil site since the mid-1800s. Over the decades, the accumulated spoil eventually joined Oyster Bed Island and Jones Island to form the north bank of the Savannah River. The refuge was established in 1938 with the U.S. Coast Guard retaining control of the 1-acre Oyster Bed Lighthouse Reservation. The Coast Guard transferred the Day Beacon Tower and site to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1960. Today, the Oyster Bed's beacon itself is assumed to be non-extant. In 1960, the National Park Service began the first of several restorations of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. For decades, the little lighthouse was a popular destination for day trippers who cross over the islet by boat, climb the stairs, and enjoy the view. Over the years, wear and tear from day trippers, vandals, and nature began to take its toll on the beacon, which bears the brunt of approaching tropical storms and constantly rising sea levels as a result of its location at the mouth of the Savannah River. The destructive effect of rising sea levels and tides has been exacerbated over the decades by the regular dredging of the Savannah River. In addition, ill-conceived repairs made during the mid-20th century also contributed to the deterioration of the masonry structure. By the early 1990s, the Cockspur Lighthouse was in need of a major restoration. In 1995, plans were made for an extension restoration of the lighthouse, beginning with the original cast iron lantern. The lantern was removed in 1997 to begin electrolysis repair, a process that would take several years. During this time, the masonry interior of the lighthouse was exposed and open to the elements. While the lighthouse was being restored, several storms damaged the masonry exterior and interior of the lighthouse. In 1998, large waves from Tropical Storm Earl buffeted the seaward side of the beacon, damaging a 10-foot section of the keel, while the exposed masonry in the lantern room suffered extensive damage resulting in the partial collapse of the brick parapet that supports the cast iron lantern room. 1999, unusually high tides associated with another storm washed away the exterior stairs. During the winter of 1999, a team of masons from the Historic Preservation Training Center, working with Fort Pulaski staff, reconstructed the damaged section of the keel, rebuilt the exterior stairs, repaired the brick parapet in the lantern room, and repaired cracks within the interior of the tower. While this work was being conducted, it was determined that the deterioration of the original cast iron lantern was too severe to be properly restored. As a result, a replica of the original lantern was commissioned and installed in May of 2000. In 2008, the Georgia Trust for Preservation placed the Cockspur Lighthouse on its annual Places in Peril list, despite its recent restoration. The justification was because, based on the accelerated erosion of the islet in which it was sited, due to the ongoing dredging in the Savannah River and the threat to the beacon from natural and man-made forces associated with increased traffic. Later that same year, the beacon's timber grillage foundation was treated for an infestation of shipworm that was discovered by members of the Southeast Archaeological Center. Increased awareness of the ongoing conservation issues facing the stewards of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse resulted in the appropriation of $1.5 million through the Office of U.S. Congressman Jack Kingston to fund the construction of a granite revetment around the lighthouse to combat further erosion of the island and to protect the lighthouse itself. Funding for the project was championed by the Friends of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse, a nonprofit advocacy group formed in 2007 to work in unison with the National Park Service to preserve the lighthouse. Working with Park Service staff, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began the revetment project in November of 2012. It was completed in late January of 2013. During the revetment project, large granite stones were placed in a semicircular ring around the lighthouse. The project was designed to protect the lighthouse from direct impact from wave action, as well as decrease the effects of erosion on the surrounding island. In 2021, the reopening of the Lighthouse Overlook Trail coincided with the beginning of a new $150,000 restoration project to address deferred work on the masonry exterior and interior of the lighthouse. During the project, the masonry tower, stairs, keel, window and door openings, and interior of the lighthouse were cleaned, chiseled, and repointed. Other work included replacing the deteriorated windows and door to match the materials and configuration of what was installed originally. Funding for the fabrication of the door and windows was provided by a grant given to the Friends of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse by the Tybee Island Historical Society, which was matched by a National Park Service Centennial Challenge Fund grant. The Friends of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse and the National Park Service are currently working with the Corps of Engineers and our congressional representatives to secure an appropriation to fortify the existing revetment with additional stone. And with that ends my presentation. Any questions?
Any questions? No.
I was thorough then.
Oh, we have one back here?
I got a little lost after you were talking about all the different beacons and such. Did I hear you say, which ones are still standing? Obviously this one.
This one, that's it.
Okay.
It's the only one that I know of. Whenever I say stuff like that, later on, somebody will raise their hand and go, actually.
You said the one across the river, when they dredged and they made that all into one island, it disappeared.
It was still there in 1960 from the way that things were worded in certain documents. But whether or not it's there now is unknown, and they don't want people over there because it's a refuge. And so you're not allowed to dock or beach your boat over there or anything. So it could be still there. I don't think it is though. You'd be able to see it, I would think. But yeah, I don't think they want it.
Photos of it.
There were no photos that I found. And the constant use of those same drawings that is the only image that I could find of the oyster beds beacon. And to answer perhaps somebody's question, one of the things I knew, I knew a little bit about Cockspur Island Lighthouse before I started the book, but one thing I did not know is that there was a sister beacon. Did not know that. And I also had no idea that there were lighthouses all up and down the river. Had no idea of that. So.
Oh, I guess the
Yes.
one that's here is still here, the one at the end of the.
Yeah, the remnants of the fort pier is still there. And
No, I mean, I'm sorry, the one at the end of River Street.
oh yeah, that's still
Yeah,
there. That's still there. Yeah.
So those
That's
are the two
that one and Cockspur, but it's not really a lighthouse. It's more of a glorified, street light.
At what point did the North Channel become really the only main shipping channel?
They said 1909.
1909.
1909 is when it was deactivated for that reason.
Did I understand you to say that Cockspur is no longer, they don't allow boaters to come?
They
by?
don't. I just recently got on we call it FOSSIL, the Fossil Board, Friends of Cockspur. It's a mouthful. I believe I believe they would know better than me, but I think it was around 2013 when all this work was going on, and they basically don't allow people on the island anymore, the islet, and you can't go in it because of
Safety.
issues with.
I kind of know something.
I bet you do. I was looking over to see if you were going to say something.
A scant, I believe, is the word for that. Yes, it was about 2013 or so. There had been some vandalism, and some people had been getting in there and spending nights and stuff like that, and that actually became very detrimental to the structure of and it really antithesis to the whole preservation atmosphere of the Park Service as a whole. So ultimately after that, put a very strong door on the lighthouse, which was then promptly broken into and broken down again. And then we put another door on top of that. So at that point, it was getting very, very expensive because these doors were very pricey. So you're talking about 5 to 10 grand every time this damage would be happening. And so at that point, yeah, it just became much safer for the lighthouse itself to go ahead and just basically seal off that area from visitation, because also with the $1.5 million revetment project that went into, there's a whole lot of money. We had also tried to seed the island itself with as an oyster bed island, with oysters, put out a whole bunch out there to try to seed it to create a natural barrier. And so you couldn't have any kind of foot traffic out there when you're trying to seed those oysters. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out really the way we wanted it to, but it was definitely worth an attempt to try to create that natural barrier. Thank you. Eric Norton, Port Pulaski.
He knows a thing or two.
Just a couple. I was going to
Appreciate that, though.
Yeah, no problem. I was going to ask you about the beacon.
Oyster bed?
The oyster bed, beacon. So the three, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The three, just when you're off the North Pier there, those three remaining.
I'm assuming.
Pylons
I'm
there.
assuming that. I mean,
That's cool. Do you know when it was lost? Time, essentially.
Well, I know that it was around. You're talking about the oyster beds beacon?
Yes, please. Yes.
Oh, my understanding that it was still around like in the 21st century.
Huh. Well, yeah. Okay.
But-
20th. Yeah.
Well,
early 20th.
my understanding it was still. Well, yeah. I mean,
we have the pilings, yes, but I was
Yeah.
the structure itself.
Well, if you're talking about the beacon itself, not
Maybe I'm confused.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that that's the pier right there. Where I was circling it.
I thought that was part of the pier.
No, I think that was what that was the wharf.
Right.
For Oyster Beds
Okay.
Beacon, but the beacon itself, my understanding, it might have been there as late as 2010.
Okay.
Remnants,
Right. Remnants.
Right.
Understood.
but I inquired and I didn't get any answers, and I assumed they didn't want anybody to
No,
know.
the research you've done is admirable. It's really, really outstanding work.
Well, thank you.
Because that filled in a lot of blanks for me, and I know there were a lot of missing pieces that we've been dancing around with
Yeah.
because we couldn't find that information. So
Yeah.
really, I applaud
Well, thank you.
Well
Appreciate
done.
it.
So at Defusky, they have what appears to be the remnants of, I guess, what they call it, the oil house. Or
Yeah, Yeah.
And obviously, the light is gone, you know,
Right.
because it's a structure that could.
Are you telling me or asking? Because
Well, I was gonna ask, is that original?
I wouldn't doubt it.
The one in Kefusky, is that, I mean, Luke's original, and, I mean, would that
The
be the same
one
style?
was
as the-
Paris Island was the one that I showed.
Right, and it looked just like the one I.
Okay,
showed.
well then it's still there, and believe it or not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, so not 10 days after I'd handed this thing in, we were at the parks, or, you know, at the headquarters, and we were having our FOSL meeting, and somebody goes, oh, the oil lighthouse, yeah, it's over there.
It's over there.
I know, and I was
Yeah,
like,
it's in the back.
now you tell me. So the last time I was driving out, I was going over the bridge, and you could tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I was looking over and I saw it.
You can see it,
you
yeah,
can
when the
literally
light
see
hits
it.
it, during the sunset.
So this
and
is
stuff
what
like
I'm
that.
talking about. You write a book and it's obsolete the next day. Because you find out stuff.
Well, and speaking of books, Bob did bring copies of his book, and I'm gonna let you walk over. If
Okay.
anybody's interested, they're $20, and the proceeds go towards the restoration of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. While he's walking over there, I wanted to make a couple of closing announcements. The first is about our March Hungry for History. That's gonna be the first of our quarterly lectures this year for the US 250. It's going to be on March 24th, which is a Tuesday at 3:30, and it's going to be Rabbi Haas from Congregation Mikveh Israel speaking on Jews in the Revolutionary War. And if you've not had the pleasure of hearing Rabbi Haas speak, you don't want to miss it because he has the wonderful skill of mixing history with humor. And if you're not on our listserv to get those program announcements, there are some white pieces of paper on the tables, which is a program survey, which I would love to get you to fill out. But you can also add your email at the bottom, and I'll add you to the to our email list. If you're already on our list, you don't have to add your email, but I would still love to get a program survey from you. And if you're interested, Georgia Historical Society has given us their US 250 souvenir booklet. They're on the table. They're really lovely booklets, and please take a copy if you'd like to share it with somebody else. And with that, Bob is over there. I think you have books, and you might have stickers to sell as well.
The stickers are free.
Oh, always love a
I have
sticker.
a little bookmark that says all the information about Friends of the Cockspur Island Lighthouse. If you want to donate to the preservation of the lighthouse or join us, please do join us. And so they're over here. Those
Okay,
are free.
and a final thank you to Bob.